Hello and welcome to Pursue Top Expense Reduction and Revenue Producing Opportunities Now. This automotive news power training webinar is brought to you by StrategicSource. We're delighted you're with us today for this presentation. My name is Philip Nussel. I'm the online editor at Automotive News, and I am speaking to you from my living room outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Before I introduce our speakers today, I wanted to give you navigation tips. First, we encourage you to ask questions at any time. You just type them into the Q&A box on the left side of the webinar window and then hit submit. I will steer your questions to our speaker towards the end of the session. To enlarge the slides, you just grab the frames with your mouse and you pull it larger. To download the slides, you click on the folder icon at the bottom of your console. So today's speaker is Doug Austin. Doug is a 4-year veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps, so we thank you for your service, sir. He is currently the president of StrategicSource, an industry-leading expense management consulting company for auto dealerships. So with that, Doug, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Have at it.
Thanks so much, Phil, and thanks everybody for joining today. I think we're all getting a little bit antsy to get back to work. I'm talking to you from my family room in Bloomington, Minnesota, with my golden doodle sitting right next to me. So if we get any barking, you'll know where that came from. What we hope to do today is talk a little bit about expense reduction opportunities, revenue generating opportunities that will help all the dealerships post-COVID. It looks like a number of the states are starting to open up now, and this is a perfect time to be thinking about what do we do next, how do we cut costs, and how do we generate more top line, because it's not going to look like the year that I think we all anticipated in January. So I'm going to give you a lot of detail today on 15 categories. There's about 130 categories out there, but I'm going to give you about 15 that you can sink your teeth into. I'm going to give you a lot of detail. Suffice it to say that a PDF will be sent out to everybody, so you don't have to jot notes furiously here. You will be getting the content, but we're going to give you some estimated spend data based on your revenues. We're going to give you some conservative savings estimates, not necessarily the savings that my team generated last year, but something a little more conservative, but something you can get your arms around and know what the opportunities are. Again, dealers are under significant pressure and that even pre-COVID. Profitability has always been challenged. There's 2.5% to 3.5% net in a dealership, so it was always incumbent on dealers to manage expenses well. It is certainly even more incumbent today. This is simply a chart that, if you look at the top, shows revenue opportunities. If your revenues are 25, 50, and so forth million per year, we've got a lot of benchmarks to tell us what you're likely to spend based on that for services and supplies, and we put that in there. So you can see a $25 million store will probably spend $1.9 million on services and supplies and so forth. Our results last year were actually higher than this. They were 29%. I'm using 22, and we're trying to use a conservative estimate here of 18% savings. So you can see, if you go through your spend categories, what kind of savings you can throw off down there. And the question you have to ask is, how many cars do you have to sell to generate that bottom line impact? So it is a good investment of time to go after these categories, try to optimize it, get your supplier base down, get the pricing right, and help your organization be more profitable. This is the 8-step sourcing process. I won't go through all the steps, but I think most sourcing organizations, either in automotive, certainly in industry, follow these steps. And this is a kind of a step-by-step guide to show you that you need to develop requirements, source and qualify your suppliers, develop an RFQ, and so forth. So hopefully that will help you as we start to get into a little more of the detail here in just a second. Another approach that you might want to consider is the 5 levers of expense management. Now, this is something we developed ourselves. We registered and patented this process. But if you look at the top, you'll see number 1 is a requirements section. What you want to do here is when you're looking at an expense category, what do you really need in that category? What are your specs? What's the frequency? Because one of the mistakes that a lot of people make is when they go to renegotiate services, assume that everything is the same. And, use the waste solution. Do you really need a 20-yard compactor picked up 3 times a week? Maybe you need a 10-yard picked up 3 times, or a 10-yard picked up twice. When you look at the solution, what does that best solution look like? Should you have a core list of items? Do you want to standardize? Do you want to reduce your suppliers? On the financial side, what are you looking for in price and terms? What about delivery? Are you trying to achieve a fixed period of pricing? On the process side, you want to look at what processes are involved. How do I acquire the supplier service? How do I pay for it, and so forth? Is inventory going to be involved? And then lastly, on the audit side, what's going to be involved there? So, how are you going to prove the savings on the compliance side? So those are some of the things to think about as you source any category, and ultimately, it's going to lead to improved efficiency, improved control, profitability, and sustainable cost reductions. So now we're going to get into some cost reduction opportunities that all of you folks are certainly involved in today. And let's look at the first one, office supplies. And I think if you look at this chart, we're going to kind of follow the same methodology as we go through. If you look at the top here on sales revenue, if you've got a $50 million store, $100 million, $200, and $500 million, you're likely to spend this amount, and this is based on our benchmarks. So a $50 million store is going to spend roughly $19,000 on office supplies. And then we've plugged in our savings estimate here. Now, we actually achieved more than this last year, but we're trying to be conservative. You can target 16%, and you can see what the bottom line impact could be for your organization. Down here on the strategy side, you can either go in and renegotiate with your incumbent, or you can go out for quote. You should look for early payment discount terms, 2%, 10, net 30. You should try to pay with a credit card, and you should absolutely, in every one of these cases, try to fix the pricing for 12, 24, or 36 months so that the supplier knows that you expect that pricing to stay firm. Down here in the bottom, I'm not going to read every one of these today, but we certainly want to limit your supplier choices or your supply choices to high usage, low cost items. So my suggestion is, if you have an opportunity to buy a branded folder or a branded stapler, well, then maybe take a look at the low cost unbranded item. Try to consolidate to a preferred and a backup supplier. A lot of organizations have 4 and 5 vendors out here. You don't need that many. Try to sole source when you can. And there are a number of office supply companies that will give you a signing bonus if your spend is high enough. You might want to ask for that as well, or some sort of rebate. Off to the left here, in every one of these categories, we're going to give you a little bit of advice. So first, get a usage report, electronic, from your supplier or suppliers. Build that usage report into an RFQ, because now you've got all the data. You want to then go out for quote and analyze the results. Try to focus on your 200 high usage items, core items that we like to call it. Finalize your analysis. Negotiate, because you're going out for quote, it's not a bid. You can negotiate a little bit further on those high usage items. Then make your decision, advise the suppliers, and thank them for their participation, and then implement. So office supplies is a good one to get started with here, and so that'd be the first one. The next one is shop supplies. Shop supplies, again, you can see the revenue bands up here, 50, 100 to 500 million. The opportunity here is a little bit greater than 14%. You can see what the estimated spend will be. Again, you can renegotiate, you can quote. You ought to try to get fixed pricing. You ought to try to get 2% 10 net 30. Credit card payment if you can. Again, we want to try to focus on high usage items. Leverage it down to one supplier. One supplier should be just fine to support all the shop supply items that you need. And oh, by the way, up here in this corner of each of these charts is kind of a brief description of what's included there. You may, and this category suggests that this is a vendor-managed inventory. Now, there's a number of suppliers out there that will come in and look at your bins, and they'll fill your bins if your usage is such that you need more product. There is another shop supply opportunity called customer managed inventory, or CMI, and actually the savings if you use a CMI opportunity is much greater. So a lot of folks have vendor managed. You might want to consider a customer managed, where you're making the decision on the amount of product that's replenished. The unfortunate part of vendor managed is sometimes when sales are slow for some of these vendors, they like to get you overfilled or over-inventoried to keep their sales strong, and that's a downside. They're not all like that, but that can happen depending on who you use. Again, get a usage report, build it into an RFQ, quote it, look at your high usage items, finalize it, negotiate your discounts, advise suppliers, thank them, and implement. So kind of the same approach. The next category is janitorial supplies. This is not a high spend category. One of the things you might want to do here is try to leverage this together with your office supply program. And one of the things I would encourage you, if you have a janitorial service today that is providing you service or supplies, break that out of your quote. Have them quote that separately, because it's typically a big revenue and profit source for janitorial service suppliers. So I'd encourage you to split that out and then look at maybe leveraging that, the supply category, onto your office supply program, because oftentimes suppliers can provide both. Again, try to limit your supply choices to high usage items, consolidate to a preferred vendor, look for redundancies, eliminate those. Again, you should be getting early payment terms, credit card payments, and lock that product as much as you can. You may have some trouble in some items in locking price for a long period of time. Paper is a market-driven commodity, as is fuel, which is used. Oil is used to make plastic garbage bags. So sometimes you won't be able to get an extended locked price on those two items, but virtually everything else you can lock in. Again, the process is very similar to what we talked about for office supplies and shop supplies. And you're not going to be wildly profitable over this category, but it is a good one to try to leverage and consolidate with office supplies. So I'd encourage you to look at that. The next category is mats and carpets. So what does that mean? Well, all of you probably have a uniform company today that is providing not only uniforms, but mats and rugs and towels and whatnot. You might want to look at detaching those rugs and mats from your uniform program and buying them yourself. We found that to be a pretty good program. It cuts down on your uniform bill. And as we know, with the consolidation in the uniform industry, the prices aren't getting any cheaper. They're getting more expensive because there's fewer competitors out there. So look at all of your mats and rugs, and there are plenty of suppliers out there. If you're looking for some advice on who those are, certainly get in touch with us. We can make some recommendation. But I would recommend pulling those out of your program if you can, if your contract allows that. Build an RFQ around those items off your uniform invoice that you're pulling out, quote them, finalize that analysis, advise the uniform company to remove those items from the program. You could even take this so far as to look at disposable shop towels in place of the reusable towels in the uniform program. The reusable towels are certainly handy and convenient, but they're very expensive. Sometimes they can be 16 cents a piece. We've seen them as low as 6 cents a piece. But disposable towels are certainly more economical. If you do use disposable towels, then you just want to make sure that you control it so that they don't walk out the door and pilfered in any way. So mats and carpets is another opportunity. Now we're going to talk about some service opportunities, service cost reduction opportunities. Again, kind of the same format that we just looked at, but now we're talking about service, not supplies. This one is waste and recycling. Again, the same revenue bands up here, the estimated spend, the estimated savings percent, about 26%, and what the bottom line impact would be. Pricing, you can renegotiate, you can go out for quote. Again, you want to get the early payment discount terms. That 2% could kind of come in handy when profitability is an issue. See if we can pay with a credit card and absolutely lock in the price. We've been successful locking in price for 12, 24, and 36 months. You won't be able to get the vendor to lock in price on taxes and local municipality fees, but on the basic services, you should have no problem with that at all. Again, I'd encourage you to reevaluate your containers, the frequency, and the actual need. Are you filling up those containers every week? Do you need to have them emptied as often as they are? Should you consider a compactor for cardboard, which is a little more green solution? Consolidate suppliers. I know that it's typical in a dealership to allow everybody to do whatever the heck they want. They can all pick their own suppliers, but in the end, that costs you in terms of price and leverage. And the more suppliers you have to manage and review their invoices and pay, the more costly that whole process is. So if you can leverage that down and get 1 or 2 suppliers through a big group, you're going to be money ahead. So take a look at your contract end dates. If those contracts are more than 50% of the way through, you might want to pick up the phone and see if the vendor would be willing to renegotiate. I'm not giving you legal advice. I'm just saying that in our experience, and especially today, kind of COVID, post-COVID opportunity, suppliers are going to be interested in protecting their revenue. And if you're in month 17 of a 36-month contract and you ask to reopen negotiations, I'm betting that, more cases than not, they're gonna be open to doing that. Finalize your new container size, quote with the suppliers, or renegotiate if that's what you're limited to. Finalize your analysis, make a decision, advise your suppliers again, and then implement. You may want to consider that same strategy in hazardous waste, oils and light bulbs and steel and things like that. The next one is a uniform program. We talked about that a few minutes ago. The opportunity there is, here's the spend for the revenue bands. The opportunity is certainly greater than 15%. And I would caution you all that we've gone from 4 major uniform and laundry services to 2 majors across the country in the last 2 years. Prices are going up. I can remember not too long ago when a shop towel in the uniform program was 2.5 cents. It's very common today to see it at 16 cents. So the prices are going up. This category bears watching. You might want to limit who has the authority to make additions and subtractions to this program. I'd put it in charge of a CFO or a fixed ops director or VP. Don't let the people at the front desk have the ability to add items to the program, but that's what a lot of uniforms will try to sneak in. Again, you can requote it, you can renegotiate it, you can get early payment terms, you can get credit card payment, and you can certainly lock in pricing. We've seen, for example, on a 5-year contract, which I don't necessarily recommend, probably a 3-year, but if you have to go to 5, we've seen locked pricing for the first 3 years with a minimum increase of 2% year 4 and 2% year 5. So you could step back from this and say, these are my costs. I know they're not going to go north of 4% higher within the next 60 months. That would be a good solution, assuming that your unit pricing is good. Again, you want to focus on the high-cost items here: shirts, pants, jackets, towels, and rugs. Make sure we can try to leverage that supplier base down. Look for any redundancies out there. If a 2x3 rug or a 3x4 rug is vastly different in price, well then maybe go with the lesser expensive item. And again, do you really need all those rugs and all those carpets in your program? Let's go back to the 5 levers approach. Just because you had them pre-COVID doesn't mean you need them post-COVID. Again, review the contract end dates. If you're halfway through the contract or greater, I'd suggest you pick up the phone. Finalize new prices if you're renegotiating, or quote with suppliers. Again, finalize the analysis. In all of these cases, I would suggest the truth in marketplace is going to be determined by how many quotes you get. And it's usually 3 or 4 is going to tell you what the market will bear out there. So while we're a big proponent of benchmarking is great, but going out for quote is probably the best source of data that you can access. The next category we're going to look at is credit card processing. Everybody is doing this, and I'm going to give you another idea that's not in here. But the traditional merchant processing can be very expensive. It can also be very competitive, depending on who you use. And one of the tricks here is to make sure that you negotiate everything that they can possibly charge you for. You don't want to negotiate 5 items and then find out on your invoice that they're billing you for 10. You want to get full disclosure on the front end. Make sure that if they're charging you a monthly service fee or a report fee or whatever they make up, that's all disclosed on the front end and it ends up in your contract. Again, the opportunities here are pretty significant, 10%. The dollars can be high. Again, you want your early payment terms. You can lock the pricing in. You want to review all the services, all the reports, all the data fees. There are some suppliers out here that you might want to give extra consideration for because their monthly statements are so simple and accurate. Other ones will complicate the simple with very complex statements, but suffice it to say that you want to make sure everything is disclosed. Again, review your contract end date, renegotiate if you can, finalize the prices, and so forth. You know the drill. The other opportunity here that had not gained a lot of traction prior to COVID, although there are a number of dealers trying it across the country. We've introduced some too. We've learned of some that are doing it. But there are credit card processors that push the fee back to the client. Now, I know some dealers are willing to do that. Some wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole before the COVID crisis, but I'm guessing that a lot of them are going to be open to that going forward. For some groups, we could be talking $500,000 to $1 million a year in credit card fees that you could potentially eliminate by pushing it back to the customer and calling it a convenience fee. There are other strategies behind that. But as you look at credit card going forward, you can certainly renegotiate with your current incumbent, same process today, but you might want to take a hard look at a no fee, a zero fee kind of solution. And there are a half a dozen reputable suppliers that we know of that are in that space. And, you know, it's fully disclosed on the front end if there are all the fees are pushed back to the customer, not trying to sneak anything in on them. It's fully disclosed on the front end, but that might be a strategy you might need to consider at this point. The other one is credit bureau. Everybody's using credit bureaus. You can go direct to your bureau. You can use resellers, and in our experience, the resellers are oftentimes much more competitive than the bureau itself. And I would even say that that's true in small package transportation, but that's not the category we're on. We've seen some pretty substantial savings on credit bureaus, not only on the price side, but on the process side. Make sure that, you can see what those opportunities are here. Again, we want to get the standard business terms and price locks for as long as we can. But there are process considerations here too. First of all, look for resellers that will sell these services. Make sure that all the ancillary services are called out or included, and that you know that they're included in the fee. Look for any redundancies. Try to eliminate double and triple pulls. I can't tell you how many times we've had general managers, CEOs, CFOs tell us that we don't pull double and triple pulls. But if you get a usage report from your credit bureau vendor, it jumps out at you very easily. So with a little bit of discipline, if you can train your folks which bureau to use first, the less expensive one, and to try to only pull one bureau at a time until you know that you need the second one, then pull the second one. And if you know that you now need the third one, then pull the third one. But don't pull three automatically, because it's just adding a significant bucket to your cost. Again, look at your usage report. Look at a couple of months. See how many double and triple pulls you have. In our experience, you can usually cut each of them by 50% and start to take cost out. Again, it's a little bit of management discipline that's going to be required here. But you add that on to improved pricing, and some of the savings dollars can get pretty interesting. How many cars do you have to sell to make $44,000? That's the operative question. Let's see here. And for some reason, oh, there we go. Next one is health insurance. There are really two approaches here. If you're a group greater than 100 employees, there's a partner that we have found to be very, very effective, level funded health, that we would encourage you to talk to. If you have an employee base less than 100, well, that strategy is different. But this category alone can, depending on your size, can throw off a lot of significant cost savings. Self-funding might be an option for you. There are a lot of alternatives out there. There's certainly, some pretty reputable and competitive solutions. And the space, as we all know, is changing all the time. This is not a quick hit. This is not something you're going to probably implement within 3 months. More than likely, it's going to be 6 months. But we are, amazingly enough, coming up on mid-year here in just a couple of months, and it might be time to pick up the phone and look for some alternatives, because this can have a big impact on your cost savings. We're going to look at just a couple of revenue and opportunities here as well. One of the things you might want to consider is if you're doing paintless dent repair today, you can certainly go out and renegotiate or look at other suppliers to reduce that cost. Another opportunity is to bring it in-house and make it a revenue source for your operation. Some of the data that we have up here is talking about if you renegotiate, what you can expect to find there. Again, the same kind of terms, but you might want to consider bringing that in. There's a lot of dealers that we've introduced this to last year that are bringing it in. And granted, there are some risks with that. You sell it on the service drive, you train your people to do it, get the equipment, and granted, one of the risks might be that those employees leave, but depending on the supplier that you pick, they can help you with strategies to mitigate the loss of employees, and then retrain your people for no cost later. Ding King is a supplier that we've had a lot of luck with, and we're seeing a renewed level of interest in revenue generating services, and this is certainly one of them that you might want to consider. Another revenue generator is something as simple as key cutting and fob replacement, having that on site. I had to do that this year. I had a fob that wasn't working. Dealer did it. It was incredible how much money I had to pay for that key fob, so there's a lot of profit in these. But again, if you've got that service in place right now, you can renegotiate, or you can look at purchasing a key cutting fob programming machine, bring it in-house, sell it on the service drive, and increase your top line and your gross profit and net profit as well. I think the last revenue opportunity is look at glass. Rather than allow your customers to use suppliers down the street, these glass replacement companies, bring that in-house. I know a lot of groups have brought it in-house. They've even got their own glass in their own warehouse. But certainly, most everybody is doing glass replacement. If you renegotiate with your suppliers, you can take cost out. We've seen some pretty competitive flat price models. We've seen some pretty competitive discounts off NAGS, the National Auto Glass Bible. So you can approach it that way. You can take costs out of your current suppliers. One of the things I've seen, unfortunately, with a lot of groups is, again, everybody's in charge, so nobody's in charge, and there are way too many suppliers out there. And the service levels are different. The price structure is wildly different. And, at a minimum, if you're going to continue to rely on outside suppliers, at least leverage your supply base down, get your pricing in line, your discounts in line, and then optimize your supply base a bit. But if you want to look at this as a revenue opportunity, you can certainly purchase glass wholesale, bring it in-house, train your techs, and maybe spiff your service writers. But there are some good programs out here to bring this in-house. A few of my guys, I think they're on this call, and I were at an OEM. We've got a program with an OEM out there. But we had a meeting in October or November, and this group was moving a pretty quick pace at looking at auto glass, bringing that in-house as another revenue source. So I certainly encourage you to think of that. The opportunities are pretty strong. Next, I want to talk about virtual card, a purchasing card, we call it. You notice that in every one of these examples that we've given you, we've encouraged you to pay with credit card as opposed to check. Well, why is that? Well, in most cases, you're going to get at least 1.25% cash back, up to, I've seen it as high as 1.8. Now, many of you in the audience out there are probably saying, yeah, okay, we're already doing that. And you probably are, but are you doing it to the extent that you should be? If you take a look at your entire spend for the organization, if you're not deploying this solution in 40% of the cases or more, you're sub-optimizing your opportunity. So if you're spending $10 million a year or more with suppliers, you ought to be pushing through at least $4 million on a credit card, and I have seen it much higher than that. So American Express offers a plum card, kind of a maroon card that will offer 1.5 points. cash back. Visa and MasterCard typically start about at 1.25%. But if you go to your primary bank that's or lending facility that's providing floor plan, I've seen that go as high as 1.8%. Banks love these programs, and they just make a lot of sense. So a good way to throw off another bit of easy money, cash to your operation, is paying as much as possible with a P card. I would ask, if, for the dealer principals out there, you may want to ask your CFO to just run a spend report for 12 months. Look at what that total dollar amount is, and just check it. How much are we pushing through on credit cards? And if you're not at 40%, well, then you're wasting a pretty good opportunity. Audit recovery. There's a couple of there's probably 25 categories out here that we could talk about. We're just going to talk about a couple of simple ones. If you've done an acquisition in the past 3 years, chances are that there's an employment tax overpayment credit. I know it's a mouthful, but there's probably a credit available to you. There are companies out there that can look at that acquisition and see if the previous owner has overpaid the tax situation, or if you've overpaid it. Now, there's some requirements that have to be met here, but there's a lot of groups that are doing acquisitions. A lot of small groups are growing quickly, and one of the things you ought to take a look at is this category. Again, if you're looking for more information on this, reach out to us and we can put you in touch with some suppliers. But a little bit of payroll information is all that's required. You can apply for the credit. And usually these folks operate on a contingency. So they're going to take a cut of what they find, but it's kind of found money in most cases. Transportation, shipping, and recovery. So most everybody is using FedEx and UPS to some extent out there. We've got supplier relationships, that, and this is another one where oftentimes the reseller is more competitive than going directly to FedEx or UPS. Resellers oftentimes, and in some cases, have unique audit capabilities as well. What we've learned is that if the shipment doesn't meet the agreed upon terms, so for instance, if it was a 10 a.m. delivery that doesn't make it till noon, well, you're entitled to a refund. And there's organizations out there that will, by looking at your usage reports, verify delivery, and they found that between 3 and 7% missed the delivery requirements that you paid for. And again, on a contingent basis, they can pull those dollars back in. This is kind of a no-brainer. It doesn't cost you anything other than a percent of what they recover. So it's found money. Again, it's not going to buy you a boat or a camper, but it's all additional dollars that just helps make your organization smarter and more efficient, and it helps keep the suppliers on their toes. So that's a good example of an audit recovery. I think we've talked here today. There's about 130 expense categories out there that dealers spend money in all the time. Typically, we see about 100 of them that are used on a repetitive basis. If you look at the audit and recovery categories, there's probably another 25 options out there. I was on a call the other day with a group that audits all the F&I deals, and some of the dollar recovery on F&I transactions are pretty substantial, meaning that the dealers are overpaying on a lot of that F&I activity, and dollars can come back. So there's F&I recovery, there's transportation, there's healthcare recovery, utility audits. There are a number of ways that if you've overspent, these folks can go out and help you recover those lost dollars, and oftentimes just charge you a percent. So just kind of summarize what we've gone through here today. There's opportunities for dealers to cut costs by 25%. If you go look at Aberdeen Group, if you look at Gartner and any research group that deals in purchasing, they'll tell you that if you centralize procurement, you'll save 25%. My results, that's all we do in our business, and we've been doing this for 25 years, 20 in the auto space, but we average between 22 and 29% last year savings. And the reason for that is dealers, by and large, are decentralized. 95% of the dealers leave the purchasing, the commitment of company funds to everybody in the organization. 5% of the dealers centralize. 5% of them, are centralizing procurement and not realizing the excessive costs that those that are decentralized do. So, look at your total annual sales. A good rule of thumb is to say if you're whatever your total annual sales are, look at 5% of that. So if you're a $100 million group, you're probably going to spend at least $5 million on services and supplies. You got 130 to manage. Certainly there are short-term and long-term savings opportunities out there. We've given you 14 categories plus a process for 15 ideas here today. I would really encourage you to be thinking about, I'm sure you are, that's why you're signed up for this, how do you make a marked improvement in your cost structure once this COVID situation is relieved and the organization comes back. StrategicSource, a little bit about us, founded in 92, veteran-owned. We've got a lot of expertise in analysis, planning, sourcing, implementation, and audit. We support about 1,300 locations or clients in various markets. Got about 220 years of experience when you add it all up. We don't know it all, but we know quite a bit, and we learn from our clients as well. I can't tell you. In fact, the P-card recommendation that I just went through with you, we learned probably 12 years ago from a client that's still with us. So we learn from our clients. We have 3 solutions that can help, and our mission is really to help our clients reduce costs, save time, and improve profitability. StrategicSource is kind of a full-service solution that we can provide to you with guarantees up to 10 to 1, depending on the solution you pick. ExpenseEdge is a portal-based purchasing program with thousands of benchmarks and some pre-negotiated solutions that you can use right off the bat. And StrategicSource Learning is another solution. If you want to train up your staff to do this yourself, to be more efficient, to be more effective, well, then we can help you with learning modules from strategy to tactics to management. So we can help you there as well. If any of you are interested, we just put this slide in the deck yesterday, but if any of you are interested in the cost savings potential at your dealership, there's just a couple of pieces of information we need. You can send us an email at sales@strategicsource.com, or you can text us at 612-386-3898. Again, 612-386-3898. If you can give us your revenue, your location count, your brands would be helpful. We can plug that into our spend management supercomputer, and we can perform an analysis that will give you a kind of a sense of what your spend is and what your savings potential is at your group. Again, it is based on benchmarks, but if you're curious and really want to know what the opportunity is, if you put the pedal to the metal here, we'll be happy to share that information with you. Again, we've got full service solutions starting at $16,000 on the StrategicSource side. We do everything from planning to sourcing to implementation to audits. On the certified supplier solution with ExpenseEdge, We provide that at $2,995 for a 1-year subscription. This is kind of like the Home Depot, Lowe's solution. We'll give you the tools and the data. This is kind of a do-it-yourself. We'll be your purchasing assistant and give you the data you need to make smart decisions. And then lastly, we've got the learning and development option, 3 different modules, help get your folks trained up and help them be more effective. I want you to think about this as you look at your organization. HR is a function that you'll have for the rest of your business days. IT will be, marketing and sales will be. Don't treat purchasing like a project. Don't treat it like a special project just because times are bad. Look at it as a discipline that you need in your organization, because you're going to spend money 3 ways: a contract, a purchase order, or an invoice approval. Those dollars are committing precious, and I mean precious now, company funds to suppliers. You're spending dollars in 2 ways in your organization. One is payroll, and the other is suppliers. So I would encourage you to think about putting the discipline and the expertise in your sourcing department, because that's not going to go away. You're going to continue spending those dollars for years to come. And it's probably a good time to get serious about not looking at this as a project, but as a discipline that you need internally. I am sorry I went a little bit longer than I normally do, but we covered a lot of detail. We will be sending out, or Automotive News will be sending out a PDF of this information. If you've got any questions, get a hold of us at sales@StrategicSource. You can reach myself or Chris Austin. Our phone numbers and our emails are there as well, and we'd be happy to help you in any way. This is a challenging time to come back from, but now is the time to jump on this stuff and start getting these categories in order in some methodical way. And with that, I will open it up to questions.
All right. Hey, thanks, Doug. That was a great presentation. Let's do a real quick yes or kind of a yes/no question here. Are you strictly operating in the U.S., or do you also offer your services in Canada or elsewhere?
We do. We have an arrangement with an OEM. We have a program up in Canada. I would tell you that we are certainly deeper in the United States, but we do have solutions up in Canada, and we are investing time and people to develop more. So yes, we can help there.
All right. Here's a good question. Wondering, there was on uniforms. Is it how often do dealers share the cost with employees to launder their uniforms or to clean it? Is that a reasonable ask of your employees?
Well, that's an interesting question. It's a really good question. When I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to work for Northwest Airlines, and of course, the airline employees are all uniformed, ground crew, warehouse crew, pilots, flight attendants, gate agents. In the airline industry, we were provided uniforms. I don't believe we paid for those, but laundering them was our own expense. It wasn't until I got into the dealership space, back in 2000, that I saw that the dealers were paying, not only for the uniform, but for the laundering of the uniforms as well. There are a number of dealers out there that have their own washer and dryer in the detailing department or in the shop, and they buy the uniforms and don't have the service provided by the uniform company. I would tell you that's a minority. It's probably less than 5% based on what I've seen. 95% have the uniform companies do that. I would tell you, since we're talking about this, I mentioned earlier that 4 major uniform companies have merged down to 2. Prices are going up. And one of the ways that, and I don't like that as a purchasing group, it kind of removes options for us. And I mentioned to our director of sourcing about 9 months ago, I said, let's make sure that we get some good solutions on mats and carpets, on disposable towels, and the purchase of uniforms. Because one of the ways that all of the dealers out here can leverage your uniform company is to tell them, look, boys and girls, if you're not going to get competitive on price, we're just going to do it ourselves. We're going to buy our own uniforms and launder them. We're going to use disposable towels, and we're going to buy our own mats. So we don't necessarily need you anymore. And that might get them to the table and help them negotiate a little more seriously than they're inclined to do.
Excellent. Back on the, you mentioned some of the cost savings you might get if you've recently completed an acquisition, but is there also potential savings in property taxes paid on inventory in various states where this applies? Are there other types of tax expenses you can save on post-acquisition beyond the payroll tax that you already mentioned?
Yeah, I think time limited how many options that we can put together here, and I would be lying to you if I gave you too much of a concrete answer. My director of sourcing and the operations guys know these better than I do, but we do have folks that look at property tax, certainly the employment tax. We have the accelerated depreciation. We've got a couple of suppliers that will look at that. So there are a number of opportunities out there to attack expenses that can be going on behind the scenes where you use process experts and that don't have to take a lot of the time of the dealer principal or the CFO. These folks can be working behind the scenes. So yes, there are opportunities there.
Terrific. There's a question. I'm trying to glean a little more from this question here, but can you talk a little bit more about service contracts with termination clauses?
Yeah, most, again, understand that we are not lawyers or providing legal advice, but most uniform contracts that we see do have termination provisions. They may have a provision in there that if you don't spend up to a certain point every week, that they can collect that from you regardless. So if you're gonna pursue any of these uniform strategies, you may want to check the language in your agreement, talk to your vendor, let them explain it to you the way they think it should be, and then maybe talk to your legal counsel. But in some cases, you're going to have the freedom to detach certain products without impacting that minimum spend level every week, and I would encourage you to do that. And if the suppliers see you do that now, they know that you're going to probably be inclined to do that when that contract comes up, and you're probably going to get their attention. So it might be a way to reopen that negotiation. But most of them do have some liquidated damages provision in there that says if you reduced costs by X% over the current month or weekly rate, they can gig you for that. So be careful with that as you pursue it.
And that sort of dovetails with a separate question that came up earlier. But what's your best advice? A lot of these family-owned auto dealers been around for 3 or 4 generations. They've had these long-term relationships with their suppliers and their service providers, and that go back perhaps generations. How do you recommend your clients and potential clients approach a long-time loyal supplier and ask for this kind of help? What's usually the most gentle approach there?
Well, that's a great question. When we first started in the auto space in 2001, I made a mistake. We were dealing with a good-sized group in a very small town. And I just assumed that they would be willing to make the best financial decision available to them. And if that meant leaving a local supplier and going to a national supplier so they could save $20,000 on office supplies, they would do that. I learned that they weren't. And I learned that relationships in smaller towns, smaller cities are a big deal. And I get it. It's not all about the price. Relationships are important. And it's important to support small town local suppliers. I get that too. But they should be competitive. And, I would go back to one of my favorite quotes from President Reagan when he was dealing with the Russians on the SALT treaties was trust. Yeah, I trust you, but let's verify. And I would say the same thing if any of you are in long-term relationships with suppliers, trust but verify. And what I mean by that is go out to quote and find out what the market is doing. And maybe it's okay to pay your local supplier 5 or 6% more because you've got a relationship, but do you really want to pay them 20 or 25% more? And they should understand the need that you don't necessarily want to be paying for their new boat or their new motorhome. You want a good product, you want good service, and that service counts for something, but you shouldn't be paying an extraordinary amount just because you use a local trusted supplier. So trust but verify. Again, the best place to get to truth is to do an RFQ and get some competitive prices, and then go in and negotiate. You don't have to go with the cheapest supplier, but you don't want to pay a premium either for a partnership that you've been working on 20 years. There's a lot of naive senior executives out there that believe just because the supplier said you've got the best pricing in the United States, and they'll believe it. And that's rarely the case.
Wow. So
I'm sorry, you asked me what time it was. I told you how to build a watch. I apologize.
No, that was a great answer. Here's a really good, crucial question, because a lot of people are going through this right now, especially in states like Michigan, where you can't operate your showroom. Not that I'm being sarcastic or anything, but while our staffing levels are reduced, how should we use our remaining staff to achieve supplier cost reductions?
Well, that's a great question. So if you've got people that are underemployed right now, that don't have enough to do, I would, and here's what we'll do. We'll make available, if you contact us, I can provide a list of all the expense categories for a dealership. So anybody who's still on the line or those that are left, we can give you a list of all the expense categories. What I would suggest is take a look at those, define the ones you want to attack, then start getting the invoices for them, and either go back to the earlier part of the presentation, contact your supplier, get a usage report, and start putting that exercise together. If you don't have time, well, in my team, that's what we do. That's all we do, and we'll be happy to help you. But if you've got some underutilized clerical resources, pick your categories, start gathering your invoices, and then kind of follow the step-by-step guides we've given you. And if you can't do that, then give us a call. We can help. We can do that for you.
Excellent. Well, Doug, we've got a lot of compliments coming in from the audience here. So this has been a fantastic, useful presentation, and I think a lot of people are going to benefit from your knowledge. So thank you in advance. And that brings us to the end of this webinar. And thanks to today's audience for the excellent questions that we received. If you asked a question that we didn't get a chance to answer, Strategic Source will follow up with you by email. If you learned something from this session, please tell your peers about it. You might save them a ton of money too. The recording will be available in about an hour, and you'll find it at autonews.com/powertraining. When the webinar ends, a survey is going to pop up on your screen. Your feedback helps us create future webinars that are even more beneficial to you. So thanks again to Doug and Strategic Source for bringing this excellent presentation, and to you for joining us. On behalf of everyone at Automotive News, have a great rest of your day.